And here we go on our Wednesday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Tim Bielik is joining us. And Tim, before we really get going here, why don't you run us through your 7-round mock that you recently posted? Tell us what you have the Browns doing with their picks.
Well, let's start with the second round. And this goes along with something I think you guys have kind of talked about for a little bit is if the Browns want to go get one of these top receivers, outside of the 4 first-round locks with Drake London, Jamison Williams, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, they might have to trade up. So I have them moving up 7 spots, flipping picks with the Texans, sending 44, 78, and a 2023 fifth to Houston for 37, 80, and 183. And with that pick, 37th overall, I have them going Jahan Dotson out of Penn State. I know he's a slightly small receiver, 5'10", 178 pounds, but basically every time you watch Penn State, he flashes and he does something impressive. 91 catches, almost 1,200 yards last season, 12 touchdowns. And this is for a Penn State team that had inconsistency at quarterback, and he's clearly the guy on that offense, and he still put up tremendous yards and obviously scored. I think he's a guy that's plays better than his size. And when I'm looking at these receivers, I think, some of them are going to slide. I think Dotson could certainly slide a little bit just because of size questions. I think that's where that's where he could probably slide more versus a guy like George Pickens, who could certainly rise because he's got more prototypical number 1 or number 2 size.
Why Jahan Dotson over? I mean, we've had a lot of talk about George Pickens and Sky Moore and some of the other guys that you might be able to get there. So why Jahan and why there?
Well, first, I kind of feel like George Pickens might not be there. I think there's been a lot of buzz, the last couple of weeks about Pickens. He could sneak into the first round. And if that's true, then you're kind of deciding between Dotson and Moore. And I kind of both are very good receivers. I think both are going to be very effective in the NFL. They play similar styles because both are smaller, faster receivers. But Dotson's got it done against better competition. Obviously, there's a big jump up from what you get in the Big Ten versus the MAC. Now, there have been very good receivers come out of the MAC, particularly guys like Antonio Brown, Deontay Johnson, Julian Edelman, among others that have come out of the conference. So you can find good receivers in the MAC. But again, Dotson is a guy that he just flashes every time you watch him. He's a small receiver, so he can create separation. He can get down the field. He presents a dynamic element that I think this Browns receiving core kind of needs to add at a number 2 position. I know you have a very technical separator in Amari Cooper, who's got a little more speed than people realize. You got Donovan Peoples-Jones and Anthony Schwartz, who are more kind of complimentary 3-4 guys, maybe down the road. But I look at Dotson. And again, I mentioned, Penn State had some inconsistency at quarterback. Sean Clifford, he had some ups and downs throughout the year. But in spite of all that, regardless of who was in at quarterback, Jahan Dotson was effective and he was sensational. And like I said, he's got more acrobatics than you think at 5'10". He can go up there and get the football. So got a little extra bonus catch radius on top of that frame.
Who are the other guys that you think could be there? Maybe it's Sky Moore and maybe some other guys that if the Browns do look to trade up, and Mary Kay and I both said that that's something we would certainly endorse them doing to get a receiver. Could a Treylon Burks fall into the 30s? Is he going to be gone on Thursday night? Who else could be there if it's not Jahan Dotson?
Well, that's the interesting question, because I think any of Burks, Pickens, Moore, and Dotson they could all go in the first round, or any of them could fall at a day 1 for different reasons. I think Treylon Burks, this was a guy who way back in the process, way back in February or whatever, I thought could have been an option at 13. Because I've turned him as a walking mismatch because he's too big for corners, too fast for most linebackers and safeties. Agility wise, though, obviously did not test well in short shuttle, 3-cone, did not look real good at doing that throughout the athletic testing. So maybe that's why he slides. With Pickens, he's coming off an ACL injury that he had way back in the spring of last year, wasn't as productive as you would expect. And then Sky Moore and Jahan Dotson have size questions. And I look at, who's drafting kind of the end of the first round. The Chiefs need a receiver. The Packers need a receiver. So really, all 4 of those guys kind of fit what those teams might be looking for. The Chiefs could be looking for a speed guy, maybe to replace some of what they lost by trading Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins. And the Packers, I think to me, this has to be the year they take a receiver, and who knows where they could go. They could go for the big guys in Burks or Pickens, or the smaller guys and Moore and Dotson. So, I think it's just a matter of kind of who a team likes at that particular time. But considering where the Browns are in this draft, if they want one of those guys, they're going to have to jump up and get him, I think, because unless one of them has a Greg Newsome, JOK style slide to 44, where Andrew Berry doesn't have to make any moves and may not have to sacrifice any future picks to do so.
Now, a little bit of negative info has come out on George Pickens just in the last couple of days. So my question actually to both of you guys is, does it change anything about how you feel about George Pickens, or is this some of that pre-draft, silliness that goes on where all of a sudden you hear about a really good player sliding or tumbling at the last minute? So what do you guys think of George?
Just so people out there can kind of know what we're referencing, Bruce Feldman of The Athletic did his draft confidential, and the question he asked to the people he was talking to were, which wide receiver is the most boom or bust guy? And there's a scout, a scout, and 2 wide receiver coaches who pick George Pickens. The scout says there's a lot of upside, but he can't get out of his own way. He's been enabled his whole life. One of the wide receiver coaches says, you love his game, but there's some issues. Do you want to work with him? He's a top 6 talent wise, but it's impossible not to add those other things. He has the size, a lot of good things here. And then he says a lot of stuff in the Todd Monken system translates to the NFL, but I wouldn't touch him. And then the other wide receiver coach says on tape, he's probably a top 5 wide receiver, but there's just so many red flags, and they're big red flags. He's got a lot of growing up to do. There's some maturity issues you were talking about, Tim. If he goes to the right place with a room full of veterans that help him go the right way, I think he'll have a chance. So those are a little concerning things to hear. And the Browns don't exactly have a room full of veterans at the moment. Maybe that changes, but as of right now, they have Amari Cooper and a lot of young guys in that wide receiver room. So he'd be going into a room with Chad O'Shea, who's a great wide receivers coach. I think he's a good physical receiver that they like. You've got to be able to block if you're going to play for Chad O'Shea. It's been that way since he was in New England. I'm a little freaked out by that. If there's other guys available, I don't know that you need George Pickens. And I think that's the difference, right? Like, if it's Jahan Dotson, Sky Moore, if Burks were to fall, whatever. And Tim, I think you're right that there's going to be a lot of teams that need receivers before the Browns get their chance. I would take the less risky prospect at 44. I don't think you're not like desperate for George Pickens, especially if there's other good receivers on the board.
You know what, Dan, I agree with you there, because it seems to me that now they are having an opportunity to really put their stamp on this football team. And they are bringing in more guys like the Amari Coopers that have that, sort of quiet confidence about them, are not going to give you too much trouble off the field, and are just going to be, team guys that love ball and are really good leaders. And if you had 2 guys that you had ranked equally, and one of them had a bunch of red flags in the character department, they're going for the other guy. That's just how I feel about this regime right now.